All right, well, welcome to Tim's Take. And today we have a very special guest that I've known for several years now, Dr. David Bruni. David, welcome, and tell us a bit about yourself.
Good to see you. So I actually am a graduate of the University of Missouri. I got 3 degrees here, 2 in agricultural engineering and a PhD in environmental engineering in 1978. My first job, I was hired at the University of California, Davis, in the first ever position in aquacultural engineering. As actually created at UC Davis in 1976, I wound up taking the position in 78. During the time at Davis, I worked in algal production and harvesting systems for algae using animals, brine shrimp in particular, to harvest algae. After UC Davis, I moved to Penn State. I was actually hired at Penn State for animal waste management and water quality, agricultural water quality. But of course, I worked primarily in aquaculture. And at Penn State, I worked in recirculating systems for trout production, which was a big aquaculture product in Pennsylvania. And then in 1987, I moved to Clemson, South Carolina, where I became faculty member at Clemson University. And there, of course, we worked primarily on catfish aquaculture, which was the main production across the southern states. While I was at Clemson, we developed a technique that was eventually patented by Clemson called the partitioned aquaculture system. Basically, we took catfish production from around 3,000 to 4,000 pounds per acre production at that time in southern ponds and pushed it up to 15,000 to 18,000 pounds production.
Sixfold?
Yeah, using high-rate algal ponds as a technique to increase water treatment and production. That system eventually evolved into what's called the split pond technique that has now dominated the southern catfish production. And in fact, the last I saw the numbers, 40% of catfish production in the southern states is now from intensified systems, and they're producing more than 10,000 pounds per acre. So that was a big success story for us. Then in 2009, I returned back to the University of Missouri as a faculty member here. Actually, initially I was hired into a position focusing on algal biofuels. During my time, my 22 years at Clemson, since we were using algae as the treatment technique and intensification technique for catfish aquaculture, we began to get pulled into the algal biofuels area. And I was actually doing presentations on algal biofuels here in Missouri.
I was there.
You were there. And that's what actually got the interest in bringing me back. At that time, Missouri was interested in biofuels, and particularly algal biofuels. And so I was here doing presentations, and I was hired in that position. Since that time, of course, algal biofuels, the problem with all biofuels is the economics. So the economic driving force for using algae is more related to aquaculture, more potential in aquaculture. And so here at Missouri, for 6 years, I built and ran a marine shrimp culture system, a zero-discharge marine shrimp culture system at Bradford Farms. You'll remember that. We had a lot of interest in that. That was a greenhouse-covered facility. The biggest problem that we had with that facility was wind damage. Anybody that's put up a high tunnel understands what I'm talking about. Wind tore the cover off of our greenhouse 3 times, and I replaced it 3 times. And finally, we realized that it was going to be very difficult to keep running this thing because there's a lot of wind out of Bradford. So I finally built a 6,000 square foot zero discharge aquaculture system in Morgan County on my farm, on a private farm, basically. Insulated metal building. And so I'm continuing my research actually in a private facility.
Okay.
Then about 3 years ago, we created this University of Missouri Extension website on aquaculture and also fisheries and pond management. Bob Pierce is more or less the manager of the ponds and fisheries management section, and I'm sort of the coordinator and manager of the aquaculture production portion of that.
Okay.
And so we have a number of presentations, overview of aquaculture, the economics of aquaculture, some videos, and a variety of presentations describing water quality dynamics in aquaculture systems, in detailed economics, and also technical presentations at various meetings.
And that's on y'all's extension website.
Extension website, University of Missouri Extension website. If you just enter University of Missouri Aquaculture, it'll take you right to that website.
Perfect. Now, you mentioned algae several times. Algae as a way to clean the water,
Right.
but also as a food source?
Yes. Well, the technique that we developed at Clemson is basically when fish farmers were growing 3,000 or 4,000 pounds of catfish per acre, the algae was kind of an accident. If you put feed in a pond, the fish eat it and release ammonia. That ammonia gets taken up by wild algal blooms that exist naturally in the ponds. And so without any kind of management on the part of the farmer, that wild algal growth in those fish ponds is treating the ammonia, which is critical, because if it wasn't treating ammonia levels would get high and kill the fish.
Okay.
So even unmanaged ponds, farmers are using algae to manage the water quality in their ponds.
Without knowing it.
Well, yeah. Most of them come to understand it as time passed. What we did at Clemson is we reconfigured the pond into what's called a high-rate algal reactor. We put a paddle wheel in and we moved the water around in a racetrack, which increased the algal production by a factor of 4 to 5.
Because it kept it aerated. And
kept it moving. It kept rolling into light, so it increased the
light.
exposure to light.
Light's the biggie.
That's the biggie.
Okay.
That technique had actually developed at the University of California, Berkeley in the 60s as a way to treat sewage. So these high-rate ponds, so I basically merged high-rate algal ponds into aquaculture. So we crowded the fish up into raceways, and 90% of the pond is waste treatment, a high-rate algal pond, and 10%, 5 to 10% is fish now in raceways. And raceway culture is a more efficient way to grow fish because you can keep them classed in size classes, which makes it more efficient in terms of feeding, harvesting, predation. So raceway culture is better. But so basically what we did is we turned pond catfish culture into raceway catfish culture with a high rate pond.
So only 10% of it is actually growing the fish. Yeah. The other 90% is cleaning the water.
Is cleaning the water.
Okay.
And the other and the reason that we did it, when I got to Clemson in '87, the primary thing that catfish cultures were faced with was zero discharge. They were being told by the U.S. EPA that they're not going to be able to discharge water from their ponds anymore into surface water, into public waters. And so my primary goal was to find a way to stop discharging water from catfish ponds. And so the reason we built a high-rate pond was to true all the treatment on private land and not have to discharge water. But in doing so, we found we could increase fish production by a factor of 4 to 5.
Wow. Because the algae is needed by the fish.
Right.
As a food source?
No, not the catfish. The catfish are being fed a high-protein diet, a 32% protein diet. Mm-hmm. But in order to manage that algae, you can't just let the algae grow up without limit. And so we put in a secondary fish crop, tilapia, that eats the algae. And so while we're producing 15 to 18,000 pounds of catfish, we're producing another 5 to 6,000 pounds of tilapia who are fed only on the algae that are growing in the pond.
And is it a pond or a raceway?
We actually did, we put them in net pens, we put them in raceways, and we just let them loose in the pond. We found out that the easiest way was just to let them go loose in the pond. And what's important about that is they manage the algal crop and keep it from getting too dense and keep it from shifting to the wrong algal species.
Will tilapia overwinter in Missouri?
No.
Okay.
They will not. They will not overwinter in South Carolina, which was a major problem. Today, across the South, even though the farmers are using these enhanced algal systems for water treatment in catfish ponds, they refuse to use tilapia because the tilapia won't overwinter. And so what we did in South Carolina, we would gather up a group of the tilapia at the end of the year, sell most of them primarily to Asian consumers who were interested in tilapia at that time, and then take a small portion into indoor facilities we use as breeders for the next year, and then we bring them back out. But you have to have an indoor facility, and most Mississippi, Alabama catfish farmers aren't willing to do that.
Right.
So they don't want to mess with it. So the end result is they grow their fish in very high algal densities. We would typically grow like 50 milligrams per liter of algae. They'll have easily 100 to 110 milligrams per liter, which isn't ideal, but they would rather do that than have to deal with tilapia.
But are we at the verge of having a collapse then when you're at that high of algae?
The biggest issue is off flavor. The thing that we discovered that tilapia do is tilapia are a selective harvester. And so if you've got tilapia in your pond, you will not have blue-green algae. They keep the blue-green algae suppressed. And so not only are we controlling the algal density, we're controlling the algal species. So we get green algae, which is better suited at a lower density. Because the Mississippi farmers won't put tilapia in their ponds, they're dealing with very high levels of blue-green algae in their ponds. Ponds are almost completely dominated by blue-green algae entire the growing season. And the risk they run is off flavor. And so they have to manage around off flavor. Blue-green algae put a taint in the fish flesh if you get the wrong blue-green. So typically what they do is they just go through the hassle of having to hold their fish in cold and clear water for a certain period of time to get the off flavor before they take them to the processing plants.
But I also thought that if we have a stretch of cloudy weather in August, we could have algae start dying off, and that could lead to some fish death.
That's possible, but generally that happens in unmanaged ponds. In our high rate pond with harvest, we typically don't get that. Now we do get, if we get an extended period of cloudy weather, definitely that makes a difference in the oxygen levels in the pond. And the main consequence, if I had a hurricane with 2 weeks of clouds, we just have to pull off a feed. Just reduce the feeding to the catfish, reduce the ammonia output to the pond.
Now, I've noticed at my home pond that we have just for recreation, I feed them every day. I start seeing a lot of algae in my pond.
Floating filamentous algae.
I start cutting back on the feed. Is that the right thing to do?
Right. Yeah, so it's the nutrient release from the feed, the phosphorus and nitrogen from the feed that's driving the algal blooms. And so that's exactly why we built a high-rate pond and with the tilapia harvesting to manage the species and density to maintain the proper balance. So you don't have that in your pond. So basically those algae are just going to do whatever they want to do. And what can happen is you wind up getting a filamentous algae, which forms a mat over the water surface, and those can die off catastrophically and lead to catastrophic declines in oxygen concentration. And that's not that uncommon.
And that's what we don't want to have.
You get this boom and bust of algae. See, that's the unmanaged algae. Basically, they're doing what they want to do. So they grow up until they reach a maximum density, and then they'll go through a collapse, a decline, decay, an oxygen depletion, and then they come back again.
And that affects our fish.
Exactly. It can cause off flavor. It can cause toxicity. Even it can kill them from low oxygen also.
Okay. So when we have cattle in our ponds, we have too much feed, for example, we can get into that situation.
Well, even in many ponds in Missouri, as you drive around and look at them, they'll have floating layers of algae on the surface. That if they're not fishing the ponds and they're not feeding them, that's typically driven by nitrogen and phosphorus runoff from the fields, either from ag fields or from manure from cattle farms. Excess nutrients, whether it comes from fish or whether it's coming from livestock or row crop agriculture accumulating in the ponds, will drive algal production.
Okay. All right. And before we delve into having a commercial one production, you mentioned biofuel and algae. And one of the things I remember from your talk you gave many years ago now was that the claims that they make with algae and biofuels, you'd have to have 24-hour days. 365 days a year just to even get close to that.
The claims for algal biofuels, of course, have been exaggerated. First of all, the first thing is they always claim high levels of production. We typically get between 6 to 12 grams of carbon per square meter per day in our enhanced algal system when we're treating ammonia for fish production. That's the reason it works, because it's better than just a static pond. These guys that propose to grow algae for fuels are talking about 12 to 20 grams of carbon per square meter. So they're always predicting a top end, and then they're predicting that they're going to somehow, through selective breeding, have an algae that's 50, 60% lipid, which typically they are not. And then, of course, they typically are claiming that it's going to be in some arid zone where they can grow year-round, which typically it's not.
An arid zone that has plenty of water.
So by the time you take the high oil content, which has not been achieved in the field, the high production, which has not been achieved over long periods of time, and the year-round production, I mean, you're talking about predictions of 10,000 gallons of oil per acre when the reality is closer to 1,000. But to gain investment, this is the kind of thing that has to be done. But that's not even the biggest problem with algal biofuels. The biggest problem with algal biofuels is harvesting the algae. It's difficult and expensive to harvest algae, and that has stood in the way of the expansion of algal biofuels for years. And that's why I have always used an animal.
The shrimp?
I use the brine shrimp or the tilapia to harvest algae because they cost me next to nothing. And they do a very good job. They do a better job of harvesting algae than any mechanical or chemical system that we can build.
And you get a crop that you can sell.
And you get a crop. But remember, the algal biofuels people don't want fish. They want oil.
Right.
So they don't want to grow fish.
Well, so we've got a really good summary now. Now our next part is that we're going to lead into what kind of commercial production that we can do here in Missouri.